If you were born a freak in the 18th or 19th century, there were two most likely paths for you in life. Either you would be cast aside by society, left to live a life of solitude, or you were fortunate and fascinating enough to join the world-famous Ringling Bros and Barnum Bailey Circus and earn a lot of wealth across the globe. The sideshow acts displayed unusual marvels that caught the world's attention, yet behind the scenes, they carried tragic backstories that audiences would never have known. Today, we'll look at the 15 circus freaks that truly existed long ago. Number 15. Nora Hildebrandt. Nora was born in 1857, and she grew up surrounded by ink. Her dad, Martin, was America's first tattoo artist, and when soldiers and sailors weren't around, he turned his needles on his daughter. By her mid-20s, her skin carried more than 365 tattoos, a living gallery of images. In 1882, she began exhibiting herself at Bunnell's Museum in New York, her decorated body both shocking and fascinating Victorian audiences. By the 1890s, she was touring with Barnum Bailey Circus, promoted as America's first tattooed lady. Nora's appeal wasn't just the art. It was the curiosity of seeing a woman covered in markings once associated almost exclusively with men of the sea. She paved the way for every tattooed lady who followed, though her own career was short. She died in 1893 at only 36, remembered not only for her novelty, but for daring to stand publicly in her father's craft, at a time when women rarely claimed such space. Number 14. Tahar, the Alligator King. Tahar Dewey was born in Marrakesh in the 1950s and was performing by 6, first as a street entertainer, later as a snake charmer and strongman. By his teens, he joined Circus Tahani in London, already carrying a Guinness record for balancing 12 men, more than 1,700 pounds, on his shoulders. His career shifted in the 1980s when he met Seminole wrestler Bob Tiger in Florida, who passed down family secrets of alligator handling. Tahar combined Moroccan showmanship with Seminole tradition, soon earning names like the Moroccan Master and the Alligator King. By the late 80s, he was a star with Ringling Bros, Barnum Bailey Circus, his act built on wrestling alligators in live arenas, equal parts danger and spectacle. The 1990s brought him to the Riviera Hotel in Las Vegas, where tourists gasped at his fearlessness. His life bridges street performance, circus glory, and a home filled with scaly adversaries. Number 13. Colonel Speck. Fleming W. Ackerman was born in Moravia, New York in 1863, normal-sized until age 4, when his growth slowed. He topped out at 4 feet 4 inches, but made up for height with talent. Music drove him early, singing and performing locally before taking to the stage with the Tremaine Brothers in 1875. By 13, P.T. Barnum offered him work, but his family refused. He studied at a New York conservatory instead, befriending General Tom Thumb and Lavinia Warren. Soon, he toured with their Lilliputian Opera Company, performing across North America. The troupe folded in 1882 after a manager absconded with ticket sales, leaving performers stranded. Ackerman pressed on until he damaged his voice beyond repair. Retiring from the stage, he became an entrepreneur, running a photography studio, a telephone exchange, a bus line, and serving as drum major for Huff's Cornet Band. He died in 1946, remembered locally not only as Colonel Speck, but as a man who refused limits, carving success in both art and business. Number 12. La Belle Irene. Irene Woodward jumped into the spotlight in 1862, and by the 1880s, she was known simply as La Belle Irene. She wasn't just tattooed, she was promoted as tattooed and beautiful, which made her a novelty in Victorian America. Inspired by Captain Constantinus, the heavily tattooed man who toured Europe, Irene launched her own career only weeks after Nora. At Bunnell's Museum in New York, she posed as both canvas and spectacle. Audiences gasped at the artwork, but the press leaned hard on her looks, framing her as the fair alternative to Nora. Irene toured Europe, graced American circuses, and leaned into her stage name, always dressed to show off the careful artwork while never letting people forget she was La Belle. She worked through the turn of the century until her death in 1915. If Nora opened the door, Irene proved the act had staying power, balancing shock with glamour and keeping audiences staring for decades. Number 11. The Mighty Atom. Joseph Greenstein, born in 1893, was small and sickly, yet by his teens he apprenticed under Russian strongman champion Valenko. By 1911, he'd emigrated to America, working menial jobs and wrestling as Kid Greenstein. In 1914, a jealous man shot him in the head. He survived, and the brush with death transformed him. Joseph grew his hair long, devoted himself to training, and became the Mighty Atom. His feats were jaw-dropping, bending iron bars with his bare hands, breaking chains with his chest, and even stopping airplanes with his hair. He performed across vaudeville and sideshows into the 1930s, later selling products on the streets when bookings dwindled. Headlines followed him, not just for feats of strength, but for brawls with bigots he often dismantled single-handedly. Into his 80s, he still performed, his final stage being Madison Square Garden. He died in 1977 and was later inducted into Coney Island's Sideshow Hall of Fame, remembered as a legend who lived strong until the end. Number 10. The Religiously Tattooed Woman. Anna Mae Burlington, born in Spokane in 1893, never planned on being a sideshow star. That changed when she married tattooist Charles "Red" Gibbons in 1912. To advertise his craft and create an act, he covered more than 80% of her body with images inspired by Raphael and Michelangelo. Angels, saints, biblical scenes, her skin became a mural of devotion. On stage, she was Artoria Gibbons, the woman cloaked in holy tattoos. Her career stretched for decades, starting with small sideshows before signing with Ringling Bros. Barnum Bailey in the 1920s. She worked circuses, dime museums, and traveling carnivals across the country, always billed as the woman of sacred ink. Unlike many tattooed ladies whose careers ended young, Artoria kept going into her 70s, retiring only in 1981. She lived until 1985, one of the longest-lived of all circus performers. More than novelty, she turned her body into both advertisement and art, making her one of the most enduring tattooed women in history. Number 9. The Candy Kids. Jean Brigant, born in Austria in 1869, toured Europe under the name Prince Colibri before crossing to America. On stage, he handled comedy, but fate paired him with Inez Lewis, a little person from Iowa who could sing and dance. They married around 1905, creating both a vaudeville act and a partnership for life. Together, they were billed as the Candy Kids, touring the country in later years as living mascots for John G. Woodward Candy. Posters showed them bright, polished, and miniature charms packaged for the American public. Offstage, they built a home in Council Bluffs, Iowa, one scaled to their size, a tiny house that still stands today as a reminder of their lives. Jean worked stages until 1944, when he passed away, leaving Inez to carry on until 1965. Unlike many sideshow performers, the Brigants carved out a stable rhythm of marriage, work, and retirement, remembered less as curiosities and more as a couple who built something lasting. Number 8. Alzoria Lewis and Johanna Dickens. Alzoria Lewis and Johanna Dickens performed for decades, marketed as sisters, though no blood tied them. Alzoria, born in Brooklyn in 1912, lived with shortened limbs, 6 fingers on each hand, and uneven toes. Promoters billed her as Turtle Girl or Walrus Girl, spinning Southern tales that were pure fiction. She crawled on all fours, twice married, sometimes using the name Alzoria Green. Beside her stood Johanna Dickens, a dwarf born in the 1920s, introduced as the Bear Girl. Together, they embodied the contradictions of sideshow life, women turned into fables, human beings packaged as poster headlines. From the 1930s through the 1950s, their partnership became woven into Coney Island's living history. Audiences came out of curiosity, but what lingered was their persistence. Beneath cruel nicknames and exploitative framing, two women carved survival from spectacle. Not sisters by blood, but joined by necessity, Lewis and Dickens showed how performance was both a burden and a way to be seen. Number 7. Mabel Stark. Mabel stood only 5 feet tall, but in the steel cages of the circus, she loomed over tigers. By the 1920s, she was Ringling Bros' star animal trainer, her act the most popular of 6 big cat spectacles. Her career was built on scars. In 1928, she slipped in the mud and was mauled by 2 tigers, clawed and bitten until surgeons stitched her body with 378 stitches. Weeks later, bandaged and walking with a cane, she returned to the ring. In 1950, another brutal attack left her arm hanging by a thread, saved only by 175 stitches. Still, she refused to quit. For 57 years, she worked tigers, her courage unmatched. Audiences adored her because she risked everything night after night. But the circus world can be cruel. After being fired from her last job at Jungleland in California, Mabel overdosed in 1968, ending her life on her own terms. Number 6. James Morris, the Rubber Man. James Morris, born in 1859, lived with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, a condition that made his skin elastic. He discovered early he could pull his skin nearly 18 inches from his body without pain, and promoters quickly saw money in it. Hired by circuses, he toured with Ringling Bros and Barnum Bailey, stretching his cheeks, stomach, and neck to shock gasping crowds. Posters billed him as the Rubber Man, a living human oddity. But the trick that made him famous also scarred him. Years of tugging left welts, bruises, and wounds that healed poorly. Fame faded fast as new acts replaced him. To make ends meet, Morris worked as a barber, gambling and drinking on the side to soften the sting of dwindling applause. By the early 1900s, he had vanished from the public eye. Records never revealed how or when he died, though most with EDS rarely lived past 40. His story is one of spectacle turned quiet disappearance. Number 5. Mirandejo, the Invulnerable Man. Arnold Henskes, aka Mirandejo, was born in 1912 in the Netherlands and grew up to become a living paradox. In his 30s, he quit his design job, convinced his body was invulnerable after a series of strange dreams. He soon toured bars and theaters, inviting spectators to stab or pierce him with swords, skewers, and glass. Doctors examined him, stunned that blades passed through his torso without killing him. Dejo believed his gift came from God, proof of a higher force meant to guide humanity away from materialism. His act, both horrifying and mesmerizing, spread across Europe. But faith and spectacle collided in 1948, when he swallowed a steel needle to demonstrate his divinity. Surgeons removed it, but days later his aorta ruptured, and he died at just 35. Crowds remembered him as a man who blurred science, belief, and sheer human daring, one who made audiences question whether flesh and spirit had limits at all. Number 4. Tex Madsen. Ralph Earl Madsen grew into a man who seemed built on a different scale. At 7 feet 6 inches tall, he carried names as towering as his frame: Tex, Big Boy, Sky High, and Mr. Longfellow. Though not Texan, he fit the myth well, working ranches, riding horses, and roping cattle with ease before show business called. His size made him a spectacle, but those who met him recalled steadiness and approachability. He toured fairs, stepped onto circus midways, and later slipped into Hollywood. Films like Three-Ring Marriage, The Sideshow, Mama's Little Pirate, and The Mighty Barnum gave him visibility, and some even claim he appeared with the Marx Brothers in At the Circus. No matter where he stood, photographs, stages, or screens, he carried dignity. Reporters loved reducing him to inches and feet, but in life, Tex was more than height. He filled his frame with quiet grace, living as a man the world couldn't help but look up to. Number 3. Grady Stiles Jr., Lobster Boy. Grady Stiles Jr., born in 1937, inherited ectrodactyly, a condition that fused his fingers and toes into claw-like formations. The circus called him Lobster Boy, and for years, he toured with his family, who shared the condition. On stage, he amazed crowds with his clawed hands. Off stage, he moved in a wheelchair, his arms carrying the strength of legs. Fame didn't bring peace. Grady drank heavily, his temper violent and terrifying. In 1978, during a drunken rage, he shot and killed his daughter's fiancé. He confessed, but no prison could accommodate his condition, so he walked free with probation. By the early 1990s, his abuse had worn his family raw. In 1992, his wife hired a teenage carnival worker to kill him. Grady was gunned down in his own home in 1993. Once a sideshow star, he ended as a tabloid headline. The man who had drawn crowds for his difference became infamous for his brutality. His legacy remains super chilling. Number 2. Hannah Battersby. Hannah Jane, born in Rome, Maine, became one of Barnum's brightest stars of excess. Billed as the fattest woman in America, she stood proudly alongside Lavinia Warren and General Tom Thumb, her presence impossible to miss. By the 1880s, she was said to weigh more than 700 pounds, commanding salaries that dwarfed the earnings of most working families. Posters loved contrast, so Hannah was often photographed beside her husband, John Battersby, known as the human skeleton. The striking image of two extremes became one of the most enduring circus pairings of the 19th century. Their daughter Zenobia sometimes joined them, though her life ended tragically young. Hannah was no passive exhibit. She sold portraits of herself to audiences and handled her career with shrewd calculation. Illness eventually overshadowed her later years, and she died in Philadelphia in 1889. Yet her name carried weight far beyond her size. Hannah fixed the image of the fat lady that circuses echoed for generations. Number 1. Frances O'Connor, the Armless Wonder. Frances was born in 1914 without arms, but her life quickly became proof that absence could spark invention. She trained herself to use her feet with extraordinary skill, writing, sewing, pouring tea, and even applying makeup with a precision that left audiences awestruck. By the 1930s, she had joined Ringling Bros Barnum and Bailey Circus, where she was billed as the living Venus de Milo. Spectators marveled as she threaded needles or fired a rifle using only her toes, her poise and wit elevating the act beyond novelty. Unlike many sideshow performers, Frances radiated confidence, meeting gawkers with humor and grace. She wasn't simply exhibited, she performed, demonstrating mastery that inverted pity into admiration. Off stage, she was articulate and personable, building friendships that saw her as more than her condition. Frances's career became a testament to self-reliance. She lived not as a symbol of limitation, but as one of ingenuity, redefining what the human body could achieve when driven by will. If you've enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you soon.